Every now and then we all get one of those jobs that just seems so simple, it's hardly worth the effort. That was the case with this little project. Made from recycled Remu, it's a holder for a roll of paper towels. How hard could it be? Well, I ended up having to make this column here 3 times before I finally got it right. So let's have a look and see how I finally managed to get this made. I've now got the stock in the machine here, but unfortunately I don't know where centre of this piece of material is. The 2 centre points at which I'm supporting it here may not actually be in the centre of this material, so the best way of finding out exactly where centre of this material is so that we can work from it later on is to just simply round this material off. I've taken 3 measurements from it. I've gone across the diagonals and found that that's 70 millimeters. I've gone across the flats and found that's 50 millimeters. So what I've done is I simply told my machine, my CNC wrapper, to machine 20 millimeters of material off this here. That should give me a nice round cylinder, and it'll be still about 50 millimeters in diameter. From there I can easily work everything else out. Now I've purposely made the file so the cutter is cutting 1 millimeter higher than it should do. The reason for this is there's nothing more disconcerting than having the cutter trying to plough through too much wood in one hit. So by starting that little bit high, if my wood's turning off centre or my wood's not properly squared, it doesn't matter too much. I've got a little bit of leeway to play with. The end result will be the same. I've now increased the speed of the machine by 300%. This will get it cutting a bit quicker. Our preliminary cut is now complete, and I've put the calipers on and I've measured 49 millimeters. So I can now use that to provide a reference to the centre point of the lathe here. Now, there are 2 important measurements. One is the diameter of this here, so that we can work out centre. The second one is measuring here and and making sure that those 2 measurements are the same. In this case, they're within 0.2 of a millimetre of one another. So that's pretty good, considering the whole thing's handmade and been lined up by eye, and this board it's sitting on here is probably bowed. I think we've done pretty well to get this amount of straightness out of it. Hopefully in the newer design I'll be able to sort all that sort of stuff out. So now we know how big this is and we know how big we want it to go to, I can now create a new file which will take it down to the exact size. This is 49 millimeters. I want to go to 40 millimeters for my finish. So I'm going to create another roughing cut, which will be quite aggressive, about a 30% overstep, or step over, and take this down to 41 millimeters. I'll then create a second file which will take it that last millimeter down to 40 millimeters in diameter, and this time I'll have about a 2% step over. That will give me a really smooth finish. I've now made the new file to take this down to 41 millimeters. Now, having zeroed the cutter, brought the cutter back to 0 just simply by pushing the go to 0 button, the cutter went down to here. I then told it that it was 24.5 millimeters, which means it's now referenced to the center. Don't get excited and push the go to 0 button again, because this time it will try and plough the cutter right to the center of this piece of wood. It will not do you or the piece of wood any favours. This should measure 41 millimeters, which it does. I can now load up my file for the finishing cut and run the program for that. Now comes the really important part. We've got to lay out where we're going to put bits on this here. So there's a recessed area down here. That'll be the next bit we've got to cut before we finally remove this cutter. And there's also, we've got to mark where this here is going to go. So I've got here an empty roll from one, and I'm just going to place it on here and just make a couple of marks there and there. Now I'm going to put the recessed area, I'm going to make it 25 millimeters wide. So I'm just going to mark on here the other end of that. Now because I'm using my rounding program to create the file to cut this, the rounding file does not take into account the width of the cutter. So what I have to do is, I want this 25 mils wide. I've told it to machine 13 millimeters, and because the cutter is 12 millimeters, that'll take it out to 25. The upshot of it, of course, is that what I need to do then is I need to align the left hand end of this cutter with my start mark there. It'll just simply machine between those two marks there. So there, that's sitting on my mark there. I'll just now zero my X, load up the file, and I'm ready to go. You may or may not be able to see it here, but you can see these little spots here. These are where I filled in old nail holes. This is recycled Remu. It's very hard to get hold of these days. This used to be an old wall stud. So to fix these here, basically all I'm doing is drilling them out. Like so. Then applying a little bit of glue to a very small dowel that I made. It's a 3.5 millimeter hole and a 3.5 millimeter dowel. I can now carefully cut the dowel off, like so. The time now has come to do the decorative top. I've lined my cutter up with the mark I made here earlier, and I've set the cutter down so it just touches the surface and no more. I've now called this X and Z0. I'm now doing the finishing pass. This time I'm using a 2% step over, which is going to give me a really nice smooth finish. Now just as a bit of a hint here, you are better off machining it using this particular strategy here, wrapping it around the Y, than machining along the X-axis. I've tried that before, and what I get on this is chatter down here. This way here you get no chatter and a really smooth finish. Here's the finished machined piece. You can see that it's nice and smooth with no tool marks on it. So here's the finished piece. As you can see, its length has just worked out perfectly for the roll there with the knob on top. I can honestly say I'm pleased to see the back of this piece. It's the third one I've had to make. This was my first attempt. You can see here what happens if you don't set your cutter properly. I set the cutter as if it was registered to the center of this material here. Unfortunately, I made the file to register to the surface of the material, and this is what happened. This one was a lot better. Everything was right, except, as you can see here, the knob's in the wrong place. I marked it correctly, but unfortunately the 3D file I made, I had my reference set in the center of it instead of to the outside edge. So the upshot is, this is a waste of my time as well. Now it's time to cut out the base. I'm just using a 1/4 inch down cutting spiral bit to cut this out. I'm going to cut a recess in the center and just cut the outside shape. So let's see how it all goes together now. Unfortunately, I didn't turn the camera on when I cut this piece out, so you'll just have to believe that I did cut it out. The hole in here matches the stem size there, so when I finally assemble this here, I'll put a bit of glue in there before I push it together, but I'll just try it for a fit now. That's a pretty good tight fit there as it stands. Now, if I want to put a screw in it, rather than put a screw right in the center there, I think I tend to put the screw slightly off to the side. That way it'll still pull it down and still hold it in place, but it won't be able to turn in the hole. Put the hole in the center, the whole thing can actually spin. The glue should prevent that, but eventually the glue might let go. But if the screw's off to the center, when it tries to turn a little bit, it'll hit the sides. It won't actually be able to physically turn, which should stop it coming apart. And if I got my sizings right, this should fit nicely on the holder here, which it does. And I've got a carry handle, it's just sitting above to carry it around with. Some of them have small dowels in the side here to stop them unraveling, and I'm going to have to wait and see how this behaves. If it does need a small dowel, I've got a little bit of space here. I could probably put one in, or I can just make a new base. You can see how it goes. Last thing I'll need to do to finish this is to give it a stain. I'll probably oil it and maybe put a little coating of wax on it just to finish it off. So there we have it, the completed project. It looks exactly as I thought it would. It just took a little longer than I thought it would. I really can't blame the machine. It was all my fault. Incorrectly made files, setting cutters wrong. It does show though, when you're using a rotary axis, you have to be exceedingly careful, as you do with any other part of machining, but you actually have to remember exactly where you set your zero to, whether it's on the surface of the wood or at the center of your material. So just take very careful note, write it down if you have to, because the consequences of getting it wrong are pretty much catastrophic. You've got to start again from scratch, as I found out. Now I've got some good news. The pulleys and belt I ordered for my rotary axis have arrived. Unfortunately, they won't actually quite fit on the rotary axis I've got. The belt isn't quite long enough. I can't get the two to fit together. It's just not physically possible with the setup I've currently got. So the good news is that I have completely redesigned it, and I'm going to be making that my next project, to cut out and assemble the new headstock. After that, I'll have to start looking at building a new tailstock, and I've got some ideas for it. We'll see how it goes. So that's something to look forward to for my next project. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later. Cheers.